Today on episode 324 of your favorite daily podcast, A Couple of Things, a podcast about things, we're going to continue where we left off yesterday on technological accessibility, and I will continue talking about two of the other factors as well as how to actually apply them in your work. Let's get into it. So yesterday I introduced technological accessibility, what it is, why it matters, and also I introduced the factors which are digital literacy, digital access, and environmental and cultural context. And I talked about digital literacy in the previous episode. I will link to it in the show notes. So now I'm going to talk more about digital access, what that means, as well as the environmental and cultural context. So with digital access, it's important to think about the fact that not everyone is kind of related to digital literacy, because digital literacy is influenced by digital access technically. But it's important to think about the fact that not everyone has the same level of digital access, and people's level of digital access influences how they use technology, how they perceive technology, and what they expect of technology. And some of the things that are related to digital access and influence like people's level of digital access is internet connectivity levels, data management, diversity in device usage, and access to things like an email address. So with poor internet connectivity, for example, even though we're talking about 5G in some places, there are many places where people are still battling with 2G connections. Only about 10 to 40% of mobile phone owners in a poll by Pew Research report never having connectivity issues, and that is basically more than half of people have connectivity issues, basically, in the 11 emerging country economies that Pew Research polled. And so it's important to be able to design that your product can be accessed regardless of the type of connectivity they have, whether it's like a successful connectivity, whether it's partial, whether there's an indefinite wait time, or whether like the thing just does not connect. So you can think about if somebody's internet connection is slow, if their internet connection is intermittent, if they're totally offline, can they actually access your product? Consider if you're using alt text, because again, this is one of the things where like something that you think is just for this edge case, this one situation, can apply in other places. So alt text is mostly seen as beneficial for people who have visual impairments and use things like screen readers, but it can also be helpful if for someone who has poor internet connectivity, because something that happens when you have poor internet connectivity is that pictures don't load. And so when there's alt text, even if the picture doesn't load, the person who is accessing that site or that product or whatever is able to get a sense of what that picture was about. And then also think about, even in research, as you're recruiting people, as you're conducting research, are you actually using inclusive methods and tools? If I have poor internet connectivity, can I participate in your research projects? For example, we're always hyped about like all these new tools that enable you to do all kinds of things. I don't want to mention any names, so it's not like I'm beefing them, but those tools usually require somebody to have like a really good internet connection, really high tech devices and things like that, and that automatically excludes people who don't fit into that category. Well, except your product is only for people who have like perfect internet connection and high level devices, then you should definitely be considering people's level of digital access in designing your research studies and even in designing your product. Another thing to think about with digital access is data consciousness and data management. Sub-Saharan Africa is the fourth most expensive region in the world for mobile data, and data costs can be especially high compared to income. So people may not even have access to Wi-Fi, and so they are very conscious about managing their data. And so they do things like turning off their data when they're not using it. They don't want to download apps, they don't want to download files if they don't know how much data it will use up, and things like that. So data transparency is key. I like how WhatsApp does it. I think Telegram also does it. If you can turn off the settings so that it doesn't automatically download images or any kind of media, and then it also shows you how large the file is, so you can choose whether you want to download it or not. And that's very helpful for people who are data conscious. That's a very good example that I like. Another good example, I just thought of it now and I forgot. Let me try and remember. I don't remember the other good example, so moving on. Also, Not everyone has an email address, even in Europe. Again, I've been doing research mostly in Europe for the past 3 years. Wow, it's been 3 years already. But yeah, I've been doing research in Europe for the past 3 years, and you will be surprised that, or well, now you know that not everyone has an email address. So making email addresses required to access a tool is actually not inclusive. You're limiting people's access. Even so, it's not a quote unquote third world country thing. It's a global phenomenon. There are people who don't have email addresses, and there are people who do have email addresses, but they don't want to use it for a product. Maybe they want to use their email address for only specific things. So again, if people can only access your product by signing up via email, that is limiting. So yeah, lots of the big tech companies already actually allow you to sign up to things with just a phone number, which is very helpful for people who don't have emails or are unable to use their emails for whatever reasons. And then the third thing is environmental and cultural context. So think addresses. So here in the Netherlands, for example, at least in the major cities and in the places I've been to, addresses are very, very well defined. Like there's a structure, there's a system and everything. But there are lots of other countries where it's not the case. And so people don't really know how to um give their address. Buildings may not be numbered. Streets may have like the same street can have multiple names. And this is the case actually in Belgium. The same streets can have two names, one Dutch and one French. So making address fields necessary where they're not required may be excluding people because they don't know how to write the address, or they don't know, or the address is not picked up or whatever. And then another thing to think about in this context of environmental and cultural context is cultural cognition and the idea of localization going beyond language. Cultural cognition is about how what we think and perceive is shaped by our cultural context, and is related to what I talked about icons. The icon example I gave in yesterday's episode, or the symbols may not mean the same thing for every culture. An example of cultural cognition in the context of digital tools is something that I've found out from the research that I did, and as well as some other organizations that have also done research that backs this up, is that white space, for example, is seen as, oh, it's a great thing. If you design, you have to have white space, right? But for people who come from cultures that are vibrant and there's dense aesthetics, it can be confusing, especially when you now combine that with poor internet connectivity. Then people start to think that, oh, maybe the page did not load fully, maybe something is missing and things like that. So you have to think about the cultural context in which people are using your solution when you're designing, and that is why localization goes beyond language. Oftentimes when we think about localization, we're only thinking about, oh, translating. This is not ideal. For example, the example I just gave about white space, um because culture impacts behavior and perception. If you're designing with only one cultural context in mind, it might not be, whatever you're designing might not be successful outside of that context. So you have to adapt to the local context, and this can also be things like providing locally appropriate payment options. For example, if you are offering a service to the Netherlands, or if people in the Netherlands can access your service, and you only have credit card as a payment option, it's not going to work because credit cards are not very common in the Netherlands. If you don't have Ideal as a payment option, most people are not going to be able to pay. So it's very important to understand the local context, because localization is accessibility. And so what can you do to apply all these things? Do an accessibility audit. Some of the things I've talked about. Can your app be accessed on older devices? If somebody has 2G network, would they be able to use your solution? Do people have to download an app, or can they actually just is the app necessary? Can I access this tool on you as a web app? Does it have to be a mobile app? Think about how you recruit. Make sure that you're looking for people who have lower digital literacy levels and digital access, so that you can actually test that your tool or design or solution is inclusive and accessible. And then also collaborate with people who have more awareness of the local context, especially if you're designing, like you're a global company and you're trying to do work in like other regions. Then try and collaborate with local researchers. And yeah, that's it on technological accessibility. Thank you for listening. Bye. Thank you for listening to today's episode of A Couple of Things. If there was anything you found interesting or insightful, or you enjoyed the episode, please do share to someone or multiple people. Like, leave a comment, and definitely do subscribe and all the nice things. Bye.